Beruchim Havoim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Nun Vov Amud Aleph, starting with Nun Hey Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. The Gemara had previously told us that in certain living conditions that are disfavorable, a person should be careful from. For example, living in Midbaros, in the wilderness, then he'll be susceptible to the elements and be unprotectable. Also, if a person lives in huts, a nomadic type of existence, then he'll have to go to bathhouses, and when men go out to the bathhouses, the women will be left susceptible to men who are immoral to prey upon them. The Gemara now tells us the following: Amar Rav Huna, called Ir, she'ein ba yerek, ein talmid chacham rashoy ladur bo. If there's a city that doesn't have vegetables, a talmid chacham cannot live there, since vegetables will be a source of nutrients and they're not very expensive. Therefore, a talmid chacham will be able to then be oisik in Torah in that city. But if no vegetables are present, then he cannot live in such a city because he doesn't have vegetables to then eat. Lememra de Yerek Ma'alia asked the Gemara, does that mean to say that vegetables are indeed something that's going to be positive, something going to be helpful for a person? V'hatanya, behold, it states in the Brisa, Shloisha marbin es hazevel. There are 3 things that increase a person's excrement. V'koifefin es hakoima, and cause them to be bent over, meaning become weakened. V'noitlin echad mechamesh meos mima'or einav shel adam, and will also then weaken his eyesight. Ve'elu and these are them. On top of Nun Vav Amud Aleph, pas kevar, bread that is made out of coarse flour. V'sheichar chodosh, and new type of beer that's made out of dates. V'yerek, and vegetables. Says the Gemara Lakasha, ha betume v'karti ha b'shar yarki. This, that the statement that Rav Huna had made, that a talmid chacham cannot live in a city without yerek, is referring to shum, that means garlic, and leeks. Those are considered to be helpful for a person. Whereas this brisa that was quoted now is referring to shar yarke. Kedetanya, shum yerek. Shum is considered to be yerek. Shum is considered to be a healthful vegetable. Krishin chatzi yerek. Leeks are also helpful, but not as helpful. They're chatzi yerek, not as helpful as shum, as garlic. Nira tznoin, nira sam chayim. The brisa concludes that if radishes appear, then the sam chayim, that means then a potion of life, will also appear. Ask the Gemara on the latter part of the brisa, v'hotanya nira tznoin, nira sam hamovis. We have a brisa that says the opposite, that if radishes appear, then they are the Sam HaMovis, they cause death. Lokashya kan be'alin kan be'imos. The difference is that the first brisa that stated it was helpful is talking about radishes, the bulbs of the radish, whereas that which is going to be harmful is talking about the leaves of the radish. Kan be'yemos hacham or kan be'yemos hageshomim. That which we said is helpful, those radishes that are eaten during the summer days, that will cool off the body, whereas that which is going to be detrimental is referring to the winter season. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda Marav called Ir sheyesh ba mailas umaradois. Any city that has ascents and descents, slopes. Adam ubehema sheba mesim bechatzi yameim. Man and animals will die in half their lifetime. Mesim salkedaitach. Ask the Gemara, they're going to die? It's talking about death? Rather, it means that they're going to become aged in the middle of their lives. Omar Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua, Hani Moliosa, the Bei Beri Vebei Neresh, as Kanun. Says Rav Huna that when I lived in these areas, I grew up in Bei Beri and Bei Neresh, it caused me to become aged. The Gemara now brings the following brisa that we said when it comes to then expanding the ears, the city's boundaries, the borders, so that we can count the Techum, 2,000 amos from. If it's going to be a circular city, then we make a square around it. Says the brisa Tanu Rabbanon, Bo l'rabba mirabba miribua olam. When we make the square around it, we do so based on the directions of the world, north, south, east, and west. Noisin tzfoina litzfoin olam v'droima l'droim olam. We go to the north, it goes to the north of the world. South, the south of the world. V'simonech egla b'tzofan ve'akra b'dorom. And your sign that you can go ahead and determine the north and the south is that if you look in the sky, you'll see the constellations of Egla, of the calf, which is in the north, that'll determine the northern direction, and the tail of the scorpion, which is in the south. Rabbi Yossi says, I'll explain to you another way of determining how you can get to the north and south, east and west. Says Rabbi Yossi Omer, if you're not able to determine the directions of the world, Merabe kemin hatekufa. You can go ahead and make the square based on determining it from the tekufa, the seasons. Ketzad, he explains how can one do so. Chama yoitza biyoim aroich v'shoika biyom aroich. In the longest day of the year, the sun that rises and the sun that sets, zehu pnei tzafon, that will be determined the face of the north. In other words, the most northern, northwestern, northeastern part, then the middle of that will be then due north. Then he goes on to explain, Chama yoitza biyoim katzar v'shokas biyoim katzar. If the sun, when it rises on the shortest day and sets on the shortest day, zehu pnei darom, this is the face of the south. Here again, we have the most western southern point and most southeastern point. That will then determine, will be the middle, the direct southern direction. Tekufa Nisan v'tekufas Tishrei chama yoitzah b'chatzi mizrach v'shokas b'chatzi mariv. The season of the Nisan, which is the spring season, there the days and the nights are equal. So therefore there's 24 hours, the 12-hour day and 12-hour night are equal. And it comes out, he says that the sun goes out, meaning it rises in half in the middle, meaning due east, and it sets due west. Shenemar says, Hoylech el dorim v'soiviv el tzafon. The sun travels to the south and it encircles the east, the north. Hoylech el dorim biyoim v'soiviv el tzafon b'layla. It travels to the south during the day and it goes around to the north at night. The pasuk goes on to say, Soivev hoylech haruach. It goes around and around, it travels and it goes to the direction of the horizon. Elu pnei mizrach upnei marav. These are the faces of the east and the west. Shepa'amim mahalachton upamam misabavton. That's sometimes the sun travels as straight and traverses, and sometimes it encircles and goes around. So these are the rules that Rabbi Yossi shares with us. If you want to determine the directions of the world, north, south, east, and west, you're able to do it with the Pnei Tzafon, the Pnei Darom, which is going to be based on the Tekufos. And also, he says, the east and the west based on Tekufas Nisan. Says the Gemara, Amarav Masharsha lesnuhu lahani klalim. Masharsha argues and says, we cannot then use these klalim that Rabbi Yossi just made for us to determine the directions of the world. Because the Tanya, we have a brayso that says the opposite. Lo yotza chama me oilam mikeren mizrachis sefonis. The sun never is rising in this northeastern side. Vishokas bekeren miravis sefonis. And nor does it set on the most southern south northern side. In other words, the two sides that he determined would be the northern face, that you go in between the most northern side, the most in the east, and most northern side on the west. And he said in between is going to be due north. That he says, the brayso says you cannot You cannot use that as a way of measuring, as a way of a rule. And the sun does not rise in the southeastern side, nor does it shoka b'keren maravis dromis, or does it set in the southwestern side. Again, Rabbi Yossi was using the rule to say that where it sets is going to be the most western part of the southern side and most eastern part of the southern side. In the middle will be the due south. So here the Brisa says not like that. Says the Gemara, Amar Shmuel, the background of the following Gemara is based on the fact that we have a year, if we base it on the sun, is 365 days and 1/4 days a year. That is going to be, 365 1/4 days a year would come out to be 90, and then if we divide that many days of the year, it would come out to be 91 and 7.5 hours. In other words, we have 4 different seasons of the year. We divide 4 seasons into that year, will come out to be that every season then has 91 days and 7.5 hours in between season to season. So comes along Shmuel and explains, Omar Shmuel, Ein tekufas Nisan noifeles elo be'arbo rive hayoim. The season of Nisan, which is the spring, does not fall other than 4 points, 4 times of quarters of the day. There's 4 points of the day which it could fall upon. In other words, Nisan, we said before, is that the Nisan has 12-hour days and 12-hour nights that are almost exactly the same, and therefore you can break up the day into 4 different parts, whereby the beginning of the day, the middle of the day, the night, and the middle of the night will be then the very 4 parts that the tekufa will fall on. Or we'll call it the beginning of the day. We'll give it a time 6 in the morning. Or the beginning of the night, we'll call it 6 at night. Or the middle of the day, we'll call it 12 in the afternoon. Or at midnight, 12 at night. So it comes out that if we then add, let's say we were to say we have the Tekufa Nisan that began at 6 p.m. So we said 91 days and 7.5 hours later begins the Tekufa of Tammuz, the next Tekufa of the summer. So if we calculate that, it will come out to be Ein Tekufas Tammuz noifels ela oi ba'achat umechza, 1.5 hours, oi b'sheva umechza, bein bayom bein balayla. In other words, if you take the 6 p.m. that we said, and you add 7.5 hours, so you'll get to 1.5. So that's what it refers to. Or if you go from 12, let's say 12 p.m., then it'll be 91 days and 7.5 hours later, which we get to 7.5 hours. That's going to be when the tekufa of Tammuz will fall out on, either 1.5 or 7.5. Bein bayom bein balayla. Then if we add another 91 days and 7.5 hours, we'll get to the next tekufa. Vein tekufa tishrei nofeles, ela oi b'shloish shalosh shows, oi b'sheva shows, bein bayom bein balayla. So again, if we take the 7.5 hours that we had before in the tekufas Tammuz, and we add another 7.5 hours, we'll get to 3. Or the 9 hours that we get to is by saying if it's 1.5 hours from Tekufas Tammuz and we add another 7.5 hours, we'll get to 9. And then we add again till the next Tekufa, 91 days and 7.5 hours. Ve'in Tekufas Teves neifels elo ba'oi ba'arba umechza, oi be'eser umechza bein bayom b'malayla. So again, the arba umechza, the 4.5, the way we get to that is because the previous 9 hours, if we add 7.5 hours, we'll get to then the 4.5 hours. Or if we then start with 3 hours from the previous tekufa and we add 7.5 hours, we'll get to 10.5. Bein bayom bein balayla. Ve'ein bein tekufa letekufa ela tish'im ve'echod yoim ve'sheva shos umechza. As we said before, all of this is calculated. The fact that the tekufa between one tekufa and the next is 91 days and 7.5 hours. Again, the way we got to that was that we started off with 365 and 1/4 days a year using the sun. We then divide that by 4 different seasons. That's how we get to the 91 days and 7.5 hours. And he goes on to say, Ve'ein tekufa mosheches mechaverta, and one season doesn't go to the next. El lechatzi shah, only a half hour. Here we're talking about the Shiva koichvei lechet. There are 7 stars that are constantly moving. We can detect with our own eyes. Like, for example, the moon and Jupiter. These are type of things that are moving constantly. Each one, there's 7 of them. Each one serves 1 hour of the day. So it comes out that each tekufa, which we said is really going to be 91 days and 7.5 hours later, so then there'll be, if it begins on the beginning of one of these Shiva koichvei lechet, let's say Saturn, so then it'll begin, and then 91 days and 7.5 hours later, then it'll also then begin half of it into the next cycle, into the next tekufa. In other words, since we're saying that each one of these 7 stars serves 1 hour, and there's 7 of them, so since the tekufa begins 7.5 hours later, so it'll come out that the next tekufa, it'll begin in the middle of that Shiva koichvei lechet. V'omar Shmuel ein lecha tekufa Nisan shenefeles b'tzedek. He says that the tekufa of Nisan, if it falls out on Jupiter Tzedek, then it will break ilonos, it will break trees. And if the tekufa of Teves falls out on Jupiter, then it will then dry up the seeds. But when is this true? The Gemara qualifies this. That is when the birth of the moon of that month will be oy b'levana oy b'tzedek, will be in the one of the Shiva koichvei lechet as levana, the moon, or tzedek, Jupiter.